The scent of coffee pulled Eliza from sleep, but it wasn't the familiar aroma from her expensive coffee maker at home. Her head throbbed as consciousness returned, and she realized with a jolt that the soft t-shirt she wore, emblazoned with a faded band logo she didn't recognize, definitely wasn't hers. Neither was the modest guest room with its pale blue walls and family photos. When she spotted her assistant manager, Marcus, standing frozen in the doorway holding a mug, the previous night's charity gala, the thunderstorm, and her impulsive decision to accept his offer of shelter came rushing back. What she couldn't remember was how she'd ended up wearing nothing but his shirt. If you're enjoying this story so far, please hit that like button and subscribe to the channel for more emotional stories that will tug at your heartstrings. Your support means everything. Marcus Bennett had never expected to see his intimidating boss, Eliza Harrington, looking so vulnerable in his guest room. The single father of two had always kept his personal and professional lives strictly separated, until now. As CEO of Harrington Enterprises, Eliza had a reputation for being brilliant but cold. Yet there she was, her usual perfect composure completely undone, her dark hair tousled, wearing his favorite concert t-shirt, looking at him with wide, confused eyes. "I brought coffee," he said, his voice catching. "The kids are still asleep." Eliza clutched the blanket tighter. "Marcus, what happened last night?" The question hung between them, heavy with implications neither was prepared to face. 6 months earlier, Marcus had been just another middle manager at Harrington Enterprises, focused solely on providing stability for his children after their mother walked out 3 years ago. At 36, his life revolved around 8-year-old Sophie and 6-year-old Leo, school schedules, soccer practices, and maintaining his position at work. Romance wasn't even on his radar. When the previous assistant manager retired, Marcus hadn't expected the promotion. He certainly hadn't expected to work directly under Eliza Harrington, whose reputation preceded her. At 34, she'd transformed her father's struggling company into a powerhouse, but rumors about her ruthlessness abounded. Some called her the Ice Queen. Marcus had been terrified. Their first meeting had been brief and professional. Eliza had assessed him with cool gray eyes, asked pointed questions about his 5-year vision for the department, and dismissed him with a curt nod. For weeks afterward, their interactions remained strictly professional: emails, reports, the occasional meeting where she dissected his proposals with surgical precision. The first crack in her armor appeared during a late-night emergency at the office. A major client was threatening to pull out, and they'd worked until midnight developing a strategy. When Marcus mentioned needing to relieve his babysitter, Eliza had looked genuinely surprised. "You have children?" she'd asked. "2," he'd replied, showing her the lock screen on his phone, Sophie and Leo grinning with ice cream-smeared faces. Something had shifted in her expression then, a momentary softening before she'd composed herself and told him to go home. After that night, subtle changes emerged in their working relationship. She occasionally asked about his children. Once, when Leo had been sick and Marcus had been running on 3 hours of sleep, she'd noticed his exhaustion and ordered him to take the afternoon off. Small moments of humanity that contradicted her reputation. But they were still boss and employee, separated by professional boundaries and the vast difference in their lives. Eliza lived in a penthouse downtown, attended galas and charity events, and dated occasionally, always powerful men who matched her ambition. Marcus lived in his modest 3-bedroom house in the suburbs, spent weekends at children's birthday parties, and hadn't had a date since his divorce. Until last night changed everything. The annual charity gala had been Eliza's idea, a fundraiser for children's education that had drawn the city's elite. Marcus had attended as part of the management team, uncomfortable in his rented tuxedo. He'd been surprised when Eliza had approached him, elegant in a midnight blue gown. "Your proposal for the Henderson account was excellent," she'd said, sipping champagne. "I've approved the additional resources you requested." "Thank you," he'd replied, genuinely pleased. "It's an important client. You've proven yourself invaluable these past months, Marcus." Something in her tone had made him look at her more closely. For once, she'd seemed almost uncertain. "I've been meaning to tell you that I appreciate your perspective. You see things differently than most of the management team." The conversation had flowed more easily after that. They'd discussed work, then moved to other topics, books they'd read, places they'd traveled. Marcus had made her laugh with a story about Sophie's disastrous school play, and the sound had transformed her face, making him realize how rarely he'd seen her truly smile. When the gala ended, the skies had opened up. The thunderstorm had been unexpected and violent, flooding streets and causing power outages across the city. Eliza's driver had called to say he couldn't reach her, and taxis were impossible to find. "My house is only 15 minutes away," Marcus had offered impulsively. "You could wait there until the storm passes or your driver can get through." He'd expected her to refuse. Instead, after a moment's hesitation, she'd nodded. The drive had been tense, windshield wipers fighting the downpour as Marcus navigated carefully through flooded streets. Eliza had been quiet, staring out the window, perhaps already regretting her decision. When they'd arrived, the house had been dark, a neighborhood-wide power outage. The babysitter, Jenny from next door, had greeted them by flashlight, reporting that the children were asleep and had been angels. Marcus had paid her extra and watched from the doorway as her father escorted her home under an umbrella. "I should check on the kids," he'd told Eliza, who stood awkwardly in his living room, illuminated by the flashlight he'd given her. "Make yourself comfortable. I think I have some candles somewhere." He'd found Sophie and Leo sleeping peacefully, untroubled by the storm. When he'd returned downstairs with candles and matches, Eliza had been examining the family photos on his mantel. "Your children look happy," she'd said quietly. "They are, mostly. We've had our struggles, but we're doing okay." He'd lit the candles, casting the room in a warm glow. "Would you like something to drink? I have wine, or I could make tea on the gas stove." "Wine would be nice." They'd sat on his worn couch, the storm raging outside, drinking wine and talking. Really talking. About his divorce, his fears of failing his children, his dreams for them. And surprisingly, Eliza had opened up too, about the pressure of taking over her father's company, about proving herself in a male-dominated industry, about the loneliness of success. "People think I chose this life," she'd said, her voice soft in the candlelight. "That I sacrificed relationships for career. The truth is, relationships never came easily to me. Work made sense. People didn't. People are complicated," Marcus had agreed. "But worth the effort, I think." The power had remained out, and the storm had worsened. Roads were flooding badly, according to the emergency alerts on their phones. When it became clear that Eliza couldn't safely leave, Marcus had offered her the guest room. "I have an extra toothbrush, and I can find you something to sleep in," he'd said, feeling strangely nervous. He'd shown her to the guest room, provided a new toothbrush and a clean t-shirt, and bid her good night, hyper-aware of the strangeness of having his boss in his home. And now, morning had come, the power was back on, and Eliza Harrington was sitting in his guest bed wearing his favorite band t-shirt, looking at him with confusion and something else he couldn't quite identify. "Marcus," she repeated, "what happened last night?" He set the coffee mug on the nightstand and took a step back, respecting her space. "Nothing happened," he assured her quickly. "You had quite a bit of wine, and when you went to change, you got sick. I heard you in the bathroom and checked on you. Your dress got. I offered you the shirt to sleep in. That's all." Relief washed over her face, followed quickly by embarrassment. "I got sick. God, how mortifying. If it helps, I've held back my children's hair plenty of times. It's practically a parenting skill." He offered a small smile. "How are you feeling?" "Like I should be mortified, but my head hurts too much for that." She reached for the coffee, taking a grateful sip. "Thank you. For everything." Of course. He hesitated. The kids will be up soon. I should start breakfast. You're welcome to join us, or I can drive you home whenever you're ready. Something vulnerable flickered across her face. I should probably go before your children see me. That would be complicated to explain. Dad? A small voice called from the hallway before Sophie appeared in the doorway, rubbing sleep from her eyes. She stopped, staring at Eliza with undisguised curiosity. Who's that? Marcus felt his carefully constructed worlds colliding. Sophie, this is Ms. Harrington. She's my boss from work. The storm was bad last night, so she stayed in our guest room. Sophie's eyes widened. The storm was super loud. Leo slept through it, but I woke up. Are you the boss that Dad says is super smart but scary sometimes? Sophie. Marcus felt his face heat up. To his surprise, Eliza laughed, a genuine, unguarded sound. I suppose I am, she told Sophie. Though I hope I'm not too scary. You don't look scary, Sophie decided, approaching the bed. You look pretty. I like your hair. And just like that, the ice was broken. Sophie, never shy, launched into a detailed account of her school project while Eliza listened with surprising patience. When Leo wandered in minutes later, still clutching his stuffed dinosaur, he simply climbed onto the bed beside Eliza as if her presence was the most natural thing in the world. Marcus watched, transfixed, as the woman he'd known only as his demanding, perfectionist boss engaged his children with genuine interest. She asked Sophie thoughtful questions about her project and admired Leo's dinosaur knowledge with appropriate awe. Dad makes the best pancakes, Leo informed her solemnly. You should stay for breakfast. Before Marcus could intervene, Eliza smiled, a real smile that transformed her face. I'd like that, if it's okay with your dad. Their eyes met over the children's heads, and Marcus felt something shift between them, a new understanding, perhaps, or the beginning of something neither had anticipated. Breakfast was surprisingly comfortable. Eliza, now dressed in her gala dress, which Marcus had run through a quick wash and dry cycle, sat at his kitchen table while he made pancakes. The children chattered away, drawing her into their world with the easy acceptance only children can offer. Do you have kids? Leo asked her, maple syrup dripping down his chin. No, Eliza answered, her voice soft. I don't. Why not? He persisted, with a child's directness. Marcus started to intervene, but Eliza shook her head slightly. I guess I've been very busy with work. And I haven't found the right person to have a family with. Dad says that's okay too, Sophie informed her. He says families come in all different ways, and some people are happy without kids. Your dad is very wise, Eliza said, meeting Marcus's eyes across the table. After breakfast, the awkwardness returned as Marcus prepared to drive Eliza home. The children waved goodbye enthusiastically, extracting a promise from her to visit again, a promise Marcus wasn't sure she intended to keep. The drive to her downtown penthouse was quiet, both of them seemingly lost in thought. When he pulled up to her building, she turned to him. Thank you again, she said formally. I appreciate your hospitality. Anytime, he replied, knowing it sounded inadequate. She hesitated, her hand on the door handle. Marcus, about work. Nothing changes, he assured her quickly. This was just an unusual circumstance. Something flickered in her eyes, disappointment? Relief? He couldn't tell. Right, she said. I'll see you Monday. He watched her walk into her building, straight-backed and elegant even in last night's evening gown, before driving home to his waiting children. Monday morning arrived with a knot of anxiety in Marcus's stomach. He'd spent the weekend distracted, replaying moments from that strange night and morning, wondering how their working relationship would change. The children had asked about Eliza several times, which only added to his confusion. When he arrived at the office, everything seemed normal. His inbox contained the usual emails, including one from Eliza requesting the quarterly projections by noon. No mention of wine by candlelight or pancake breakfasts or children in pajamas. Their first meeting that day was a department review. Eliza conducted it with her usual efficiency, addressing him exactly as she always had. If anything, she seemed more distant, avoiding direct eye contact. The message was clear: what had happened was an anomaly, best forgotten. Marcus told himself he was relieved. The last thing he needed was complications at work. His children relied on his stability, his focus. A confused relationship with his boss would threaten everything he'd built. Yet as the weeks passed, he found himself noticing things about Eliza he'd overlooked before: the way she absently tucked her hair behind her ear when concentrating, how her voice softened when she spoke about projects she was passionate about, the rare but transformative smile that occasionally appeared. For her part, Eliza maintained their professional distance flawlessly. If she occasionally asked about his children, it seemed like polite interest rather than genuine connection. The woman who had sat at his kitchen table, laughing with Sophie and Leo, seemed to have vanished. Until the school called on a Tuesday afternoon. Leo had fallen during recess, breaking his arm. Marcus had been in a client meeting across town when his phone buzzed with the school's number. By the time he'd made his excuses and rushed out, he'd had 3 missed calls and a text from the school saying they were taking Leo to the emergency room. Panic rising, he'd called the school back while racing to his car, only to be told that Leo had already been picked up by his emergency contact. "But I didn't call anyone," Marcus had said, confused. Ms. Harrington showed her ID and signed him out, the administrator had explained. "She's listed on your emergency form." Marcus had been stunned. He'd added Eliza to the emergency contact list after the night of the storm, thinking it prudent to have someone from work listed, but he'd never expected her to actually respond to a call. He'd found them in the pediatric emergency room, Leo sitting on an exam table with a bright blue cast on his arm, Eliza beside him, reading aloud from a children's book she must have purchased in the hospital gift shop. "Dad!" Leo had called, his face lighting up. "Look at my cast." Ms. Eliza said blue was the bravest color, and the doctor let me pick. Marcus had approached slowly, taking in the scene, his son's tear-stained but now cheerful face, and Eliza, who looked up with an expression he couldn't quite read. "The school called me," she explained, standing. "They couldn't reach you. I hope it was okay that I came." "Of course," he'd said, still processing. "Thank you. I was in a meeting across town." Ms. Eliza held my hand when they took the X-ray, Leo informed him proudly. "She didn't even get scared." Marcus had looked at her then, really looked, and seen something new in her face, uncertainty, vulnerability, and something else that made his heart beat faster. "Thank you," he'd said again, meaning it more deeply than she could know. "I should get back to the office," she'd replied, gathering her things. "The doctor said it's a clean break. He'll need a follow-up in 2 weeks." She'd squeezed Leo's good hand, promised to sign his cast at work, and left before Marcus could say anything more. That evening, after Leo was settled with his pain medication and Sophie had covered half his cast with careful drawings, Marcus had found himself staring at his phone, composing and deleting text messages to Eliza. Finally, he'd written simply, "What you did today meant everything. Thank you." Her reply had come minutes later, "He's a brave kid. I was happy to help." Something had changed after that day. At work, Eliza maintained her professional demeanor, but small differences emerged. She asked about Leo's recovery. She approved Marcus's request to adjust his hours for doctor appointments without question. Once, she'd even brought a small dinosaur figurine to a meeting, discreetly passing it to Marcus for Leo's collection. 2 weeks later, when Marcus had mentioned needing to leave early for Leo's follow-up appointment, Eliza had hesitated before asking, "Would it be helpful if I came along?" Sometimes a second adult can be useful with these things. He'd been surprised but touched by the offer. "That's kind of you, but I wouldn't want to take you."